everyone to my presentation today. So in my presentation, I'm going to talk about some key information of my research project. And the research title is Vietnamese EFL Students' Perceptions of the Use of Vocabulary Notebooks to Improve Vocabulary Acquisition. There are 5 main parts in my presentation. The first part is statement of research problem, in which I'm going to tell you the reason why I conduct this research, and also what I expect to achieve at the end of the project. And for the second part, which is literature review, I'm going to have a look at some research projects in my field of study, and in terms of their objectives, context, methods, and findings, and see what I can learn from the projects. Moving forward to the third part, my research context will be described in detail in this part, and also some cultural factors affecting my research will be also mentioned. And the next part, I'm going to describe what methods I'm going to use in my research, and also the procedure of the whole research. And last but not least, some ethical issues will be discussed, and also some problems that I may potentially encounter in my research. Let's now look at the first part, which is statement of research problem. So why did I decide to conduct this research? From my observation, I've seen that my students are struggling so hard to express themselves in English. They couldn't recall or reproduce vocabulary items that were previously introduced in the course. So I started reflecting on my teaching practices and came to understand that there was an overemphasis on meaning and on communicative activities in which meaning and fluency are main focuses. And according to Nation 2007, a well-balanced language course might consist of 4 equal parts: a meaning-focused input, a meaning-focused output, fluency development, and finally, a language-focused learning. However, in my case, there was a great lack of deliberate attention to vocabulary knowledge and learning. I used to expect my student to implicitly acquire vocabulary knowledge through reading and listening. And speaking of my students' vocabulary learning practices, my students do not tend to record newly presented vocabulary items, and if they are not told to do so. And they also think that knowing word meaning equals knowing a word. So for all of the reasons I mentioned above, I strongly contend that there is a need for a pedagogical intervention in my course that assists my students' vocabulary learning or vocabulary acquisition. And after several weeks of observation and then literature researching, I decided to adopt vocabulary notebooks as a pedagogical intervention to improve my students' vocabulary acquisition. And my end goal is to examine my students' perceptions towards the use of vocabulary notebooks to improve their vocabulary acquisition. To simply put, my research question is, what perceptions do Vietnamese EFL students have about the use of vocabulary notebook to improve vocabulary acquisition? Move on to the second part, which is literature review. The first thing I'd like to mention is the definition of vocabulary notebook, which is the key idea in my innovation. Vocabulary notebook refers to any form of notebook used for recording new and useful vocabulary items and some additional information about the word. So after literature searching, I was wondering if this idea was innovative, since I have found the use or the implementation of vocabulary notebooks originated a few decades ago. But as stated in The Nature of Educational Innovation by Alice 2017, an innovation is not necessarily a refreshingly new idea. The bottom line is in the way they implement the innovation, the idea, using the foundation of pre-existent ones. And for me, the innovativeness of my research is built upon its relevance to my students' needs, its adaptability to my own teaching context, its continuous reflection during the process, and also its networked power between me as an insider researcher and my students. And most importantly, my theoretical perspective as an interpretivist is that my research will be looking at individual differences. We'll be looking at each individual, and I believe that human perceptions will vary from one person to another, and that's what I'm looking for in my research. Let's consider this in more detail. I have found five researchers here. These researchers are closely linked to my research in terms of research objectives, in terms of field of study, and also their context. Here there is one research that investigates students' process of vocabulary or word selection for study. And the other two here researchers that focus on the impact of vocabulary notebooks on vocabulary acquisition. And the two remaining researchers, which are most similar to mine, investigate students and teachers' perceptions of vocabulary notebooks. Alright, for the first research, which is conducted by Mark Crusty, 2007. This research has indicated an issue around vocabulary learning practice, and that is students often find it difficult to identify what useful words are, and also they don't know how to write example sentences, and often fail to see the importance of collocations as well. But in this research, since the researcher only used one data collection instrument, which was exam mining, vocabulary notebooks. So sometimes it's really hard. It was subjective for the researcher to interpret students and feelings sometimes. And for the next two researchers that are conducted by Herschel and Frist, 2013, and Waters and Bosker, 2009, these two researchers are quite similar in terms of research objectives. They want to measure the impact of vocabulary notebooks on vocabulary acquisition And that's why both of these researchers use pre-test and post-test to measure the impact of vocabulary notebooks before and after the intervention. However, for Waters and Bosker, 2009, they also use interviews after the implementation period to listen for more students' experiences. I think this is quite a good idea because compare the two researchers. I can see that Waters and Bosker 2009 has provided a clearer picture. However, it would be very hard if the interviews are conducted at the end of the implementation period and students are required to recall all of the experiences before that. So in my research, what I'm doing is that I will ask students to write reflective journals during every 2 weeks. So students will be more mindful of their practices. So later, at the end of the period, they will find it easier to recall their experiences and give more information to the interviewer later. And for the last two researchers, which are quite similar to mine, they also researched students and teachers' perceptions of vocabulary notebooks. However, that 2013, he uses interviews only in his research. And as I mentioned earlier, they will be very hard for students to describe their whole experiences after it already ends. And for 2002, he uses questionnaires to ask for students and teachers' comments. And the thing is that since this is a questionnaire, then it will be very hard for people to tell the whole experience. And one example is that one student said that he or she didn't like example sentences. And when I read that information, when I read that finding in Fall Study 2002, I was wondering if that student did not know how to write example sentences, or did not understand words, or found it hard to understand words from context, or basically he found it boring to do that. So it was really hard to interpret students' experiences using only questionnaires that way. And besides all methodological aspects, there is also one more thing in terms of the implementation of vocabulary notebooks. It is that there is only one research here, which is conducted by Waters and Bosker 2009, that they consider vocabulary notebooks as part of students' classroom learning. And the other four researchers, they only regard vocabulary notebooks as part of students' homework. So the role of teachers would be very different, because here in Waters and Bosker 2009, teachers will play the role of not only assessors but also facilitators. So that is also what I'm going to do in my research, because I believe if the teachers can be both assessor and facilitator, they could support students more in terms of their learning. Then they can make sure that the words students learn at home can be recycled later at school, and the more involvement between teachers and students the more teachers could understand the difficulties of their students. Now, let's turn to the next part. So, basing on all of the information I got from my literature searching, I have my own innovation. And now I want to tell about my research setting and cultural aspects. My research will be conducted in Hanoi University of Industry, which is a quite positive academic environment because here all teachers and students are encouraged to do research. And also, my research participants are second-year students majoring in translation and interpreting. So they are quite highly motivated because they know that later, after graduation, English will be of great importance to them, especially speaking skills. Now let's move to the next part, which is methodology and methods. So my research is a qualitative intervention study, and there will be 4 to 5 students participating in this research. And also, in order to answer the key question, the main question in my research, that is, what perception do Vietnamese EFL students have about the use of vocabulary notebooks to improve vocabulary acquisition? I'm going to use 3 research methods. The first one is reflective written journals. We provide prompts, and students can choose to write either in Vietnamese or English. And the next part is, at the end of the implementation period, I'm going to collect my students' vocabulary notebooks for analysis. And after having a look at their journals and also their notebooks, I may be final editing the question list and then I will have individual interviews with students. So here is the procedure of my research. First, I will be selecting participants for my research, and then there will be an intervention course and journal collection during the course. And also, after that, I will be collecting vocabulary notebooks for analysis. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I will be looking at journals and notebooks, and then I will finalize the question list, and then before individual interviews with students. And last but not least, I'll be analyzing the data that I have collected. And here on this slide, you can see this is the implementation, how I'm going to implement or how I'm going to incorporate vocabulary notebooks in my course. So the idea was adapted from Smith and Smith, 1995. So the course will last 4 weeks, and there will be an introductory session at the beginning of the course. And in this session, I'll be introducing students with vocabulary number format, principles, aspects of vocabulary learning, and also some tools for them to use at home. Some tools here, I mean, for example, dictionary, and also some tools to check the frequency levels of the words. And there will be 2 lessons per week, 2 90-minute face-to-face lessons per week. And for the first lesson, students will study vocabulary through reading and listening, and then they will be assigned to create notebooks by themselves at home. And they have to send or submit their work to students for teachers for reviewing. And for the second lesson, there will be notebook-related activities such as notebook sharing, semantic map, or Pictionary, and then followed by some speaking practice activities. Now let's turn to the last part of my presentation, that is ethics and anticipated problems. So for ethics part, the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to ask for my institution's permissions to conduct the research. And also, I need to make sure that, and after that, I will be informing my students of my research objectives, and also my research procedure, and what they're expected to do as participants. And then I will send them a participant consent document so that they would have time to think about it and make a decision. And I think I also need to be aware, very well aware, of the fact that there is a power distance here in Vietnam, which is part of Asian culture, I must say. And in this case, I'm also an insider researcher. I am both their teacher and also a researcher. So they might feel reluctant, they might feel forced to say no or to refuse to participate in the research. So, but when thinking of these problems, and then I thought that because I have been working with my students for almost 2 years, and for all the past time, I've always been building a very positive and positive relationship with my students. And also, during the time with my students, I have always been asking them to be reflective of their and critical of their own learning and my teaching as well. So I think that my students are accustomed to the idea of being critical of what is going on, and not feel that much pressure to speak their mind in my research. And for the last part, in terms of participants' privacy, I need to make sure, I need to guarantee my students' privacy when they participate in my research. And in order to do that, I'm going to use pseudonyms, and also anonymizing all the information I've got. So to make sure that my students will feel safe when participating in the research. And for anticipate some problems that I may encounter in my research, it is that my students are quite busy actually, and I think that due to their tight schedule at school, they might feel hard to follow classes and also to do extra work at home. So I think that I need to be very supportive at that time to make sure that they are still committed to work in my class. And for the second part, for me as a teacher, I also need to admit that I have quite a tight teaching schedule at school as well. So it might affect my time for data collection. So one idea is that maybe I can conduct an online interview with my students as well, in case we can arrange time for face-to-face one. And for the last thing, it is that in case my institution reject to lend classrooms or facilities, I may need to use a small classroom in my house where I also have projectors and a small computer. So I think this might not be a big problem. So, so far, that is also the end of my presentation today. And I hope that I think so far I've just given an overview of my research, and I hope that my research will be conducted successfully, and so that I could bring, an innovative, a new teaching method to the classroom, and helping my students with their vocabulary learning and also their speaking skills.